Okay, in this demonstration we're going to create an external content type, and then we'll go in and create a list from that content type. So let's fire up. Oops. Oh, come on. Let's go home. Athena Group BI. There you go. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go Site Actions, and we need to open this in SharePoint Designer. Edit in SharePoint Designer, or you could, just, it'll take a second here, I'll talk. You could just fire up SharePoint Designer and navigate into the URL. Well, let's give it a second to open. Okay, and as it opens, it'll connect on in and go to my home page. I'm going to go over here and create external content types. And I already have an external content type up here that I created earlier, so I could do a different demo, which of course I've forgotten by now. But anyway, we're going to go external content type up here in the ribbon. And that'll pop on in, and I'm going to give it a name. Just a second, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do here. Let me open up the database. I'm connected into Athena Group Student, which is a little bitty database we use for different things. We have a number of different databases that we use for different demonstrations. But here's my Athena Group Student, and I've got the customers table over here that I want to connect into, and also the employees table. And you'll notice what I'm going to connect here a little bit later on after I have these connected. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to put an association between these two, because I'm going to tie postal code there over to postal code here. But right now we'll create these two content types. So let's go in and create customer sales or employees HR, it really doesn't matter. So back over in SharePoint Designer, I click the new external content type, and I'm going to give it a name. Maybe I will. There we go. Now I'm going to call this student, just to differentiate it from another database that we use. And if I click off of that, I could change the display name here, but it'll match on up, and that's fine. Now you see this office item type. If I pull down that list, if I was creating such as from an employees database and I wanted to tie it in as a contact into Outlook, then I would select this contact item type, and then I could map the fields more easily between this list or this external content type and Outlook. And you notice appointment, contact, and task, how it's generated towards Outlook. Outlook today is moving over to almost a tool of choice that people use to synchronize their connections and their activities, etc. But we're going to go with generic list. I'm not trying to sell you on Outlook here. All right, now that I know I'm going to create a generic list, I'm going to click on this Discover. And I've already got a connection in Athena Group 2012, which is a different database, but we're going to go Add Connection, and I would pick the .NET type I have. Let's just real quick. If I pick the .NET name, it would ask me to drill into the assembly well beyond the scope of this course, so I'm not going to do that. So we'll go Add Connection. Let's look at another one. The WCF server, Windows Communication Foundation. And if I click that, it's going to ask me for my WSDL document, and my service endpoint URL, proxy, etc., metadata, and we're not going to do that either. We're going to do the easy one. We're going to tie into SQL because this course only has a few days to run. So we're going to say SQL, and now it's asking me for my database server. And if I pop up over here again into SQL 2012, there is the name of my database server, not my database server, which is Athena Group 2012 MS, Athena Group Student. See if I go, I already have it connected, I think. If you're not a database guy, you can have multiple instances of databases. Look, I'll go Connect, Database Engine, and I could pull that down. Here's the different engines that we have installed on this demo box. Let me cancel out of that, because we're going to go Athena Group MS, member server, the default. Boop. And so now I'll type that in. You say, where's the browse function? So do I. Hopefully I didn't fat finger it. And now it's asking me for the name of the database, and that is Athena Group Student. Let's again make sure Athena Group Student. I'll right click that son of a gun, and I'm going to say rename. I'm going to cheat, Control C, come out of it. Go over in here, Control V, and there I'm sure I didn't have to fat finger it. Now how I connect with my identity, the user's identity, whoever it is that's connecting in there, or impersonated, if I have an impersonation that I'm doing down in here, or the secured source store application ID. And down here I would put in that secured store that we talked about earlier. So if we connect into this external database with a secured store that holds the credentials that are going to use to tie in here, we would down here say what the name of that secured store is. We're going to go with user's ID, and we're going to say OK. Beep, beep. Ta-da! There's Mathino Group Student. Let's expand it on out. And there's the tables. Okay, let's create an external content type off of employees. So I've got employees down in here, and I'll right-click that, and now I can choose what operations I want to create off of that. Read, write, all the crud. Create, read, update, and delete. But I'm going to say create all operations. And now all my operations are in here. I could come in and select parameters and filters. Well, right now I got to say operation properties. And I'll go next. And now here's this parameter collection. If I don't want some of this stuff back there to come through and actually read, then I don't need it. If I don't want the, whatever it is, the the ID down here, I don't, etc. And if you have something in here like a row GUID, etc., and you don't want to bring it back, then you just would select it. Here's your employee ID, all right, and we've got that. And you see I can map this also over to an office property. It's unmapped at this time, but I could come over here and map it into an office property. Now I can put it down here in this show and picker so that we can come through and pick that on up. And normally my employee ID is going to be my primary key, which is going to be shown down in here. All right, and now I can do this. See, I can do this map to identifier, office property. It's unmapped at this time, but I could come in and map it into some property, identifier, last name, and down here, last name, display name, etc. So, required read only, that's all good, that's all good. Employee ID, oops, I don't want that. I'm going to clear that on out. I want employee ID as my key. Sounds good. We'll go next. And at this point, I would filter it. You want to filter this stuff. All right. Now, in this course, it doesn't matter because I'm only returning a few hundred records. But if I'm returning 80 million records down here, so I want to come in and I wanted to come through there, and I would come in and I would add some kind of a filter down here. All right. So now I would click to add, and then I would give it a name, new filter down here. Comparison is equal to filter ID, and then I go through and I could set whatever the values are down in here. So I would say greater than employee ID, my comparison operator, and now the user can come through and pick that filter, and when it's like a where clause in T-SQL, and when they send it on across, they're going to return a subset of what's actually down there on the database, right? We highly recommend this. And in this case, I'm going to cancel out of it because I really don't need it for this little bitty thing. I'll remove it. And now, look, strongly recommended, blah, 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 blah. Finish. And I've got it. And there is my employee ID. Not done yet. You got to go up here and click Save. Beep. Okay. Now let's go over there and make sure it's there. And there's employee students. Oops, let me go back and show you what I did. Here's employee students, and if I click the hyperlink, that'll take me right back to employee student. And these are just tabs up here. The standard baloney, I can go through and close the different tabs. All right, so you got it. Okay, so now I've got an external content type, employee students, and let's create a list from it. So I'm going to click create list, create new external list, and list name, and I'll match this on up. Employee student, list name, yeah, read operation, read and service, yeah, okay. And I could also create an info path form, which I'm not going to do at this time. And she'll come through and create the list. Pow! Now let's switch over to SharePoint. Okay, I switched back to SharePoint. I called refresh, and there's employee students. And if I double click that, There's everything set up in there. And here's my employee ID. Right? And I can come through and I can select that employee ID. And if I pull this down, I can do the sorting and I can pick an employee ID. And you see the filter came back across. So if I would have set a filter up so that I said employee ID, you know, in some range or whatever, if you have 100,000 employees, then you might want to come through and filter it by division or whatever it is you're doing down in here. And you see, as you add each one of these, this is the picker. If I add each one of these, then I'm going to be able to come through here and I can do different. So here I set it up as a doctor. And here I'm going to clear the filter. And here I'm just filtering down here on my doctors. And see, there's my filter tag up in here. Okay, I switched over to Central Administration because I want to show you something in here. Here's my employee students that was automatically picked up in there for me. And I can come in here and I can go set permissions. And you see these permissions are already set on this object. Right? They're already set because earlier we went through and we set up the metadata store permissions so that when we added all this in, we had a little demo on it. So all objects, as we come down here then, are set up, inherit the permissions from the store. If you don't want that, then you go through and you're going to delete out there's object permissions in here, and you can come down, you can set the permissions on a individual content type, or external content type, so that you have individual permissions down, okay? Okay, one last thing. I'm over here on this list, and if I want to modify it, this is a standard list now. Your users will believe that this is SharePoint content, but this content is actually retrieved from the external system. But if I come over here to list, and it's a standard list, so I can go down here, I can do list settings, which will fire it on up in, I'm sorry, if I went that other one, it would fire it up in SharePoint Designer. Now I go into list settings, and you see I can change all this information down here. Right, so if I go in here and I go into, delete the list, permissions for the list, etc., and I can change all of my settings in here. You see external content type, employee student, and it's off of an ASPX page. Very good, very good. Let's go back one more thing. All right, so I'm back over here, and if I go into list properties, all right, finally list properties came up. Now you see if I go edit list, SharePoint Designer will fire up, go right into where I was, and now from this page in here I can come in and I can do any edits I want. And you notice down here, here's the ASPX pages. They're all configurable, so I can go in and set it on up. Here's my permissions for the list, and this just takes me back over and I can set all the permissions up. Out of time.